When people take a trip into the wilderness, they rarely consider how easy it is to disappear among majestic landscapes, dense forests, or endless snowfields. But what when an ordinary walk turns out to be a mystery that no amount of logic can explain? Seguin Lighthouse, Lake Ladoga, and Norway's Jotunheimen Mountains are three places that hold eerie stories of disappearing people. There's no mysticism or ghosts in these stories, just facts that send chills down your spine. Today, you'll learn three mysterious disappearances that are forever buried in archives, local legends, and the memories of those who have tried to find answers. What started out as an ordinary adventure has become one of the greatest mysteries of these places. Seguin Lighthouse, located on Maine's rocky coast, has always been a place the locals tried to avoid. Old fishermen told stories of ghostly lights appearing in the night and voices that echoed through the fog when boats came too close. The lighthouse was officially abandoned back in the 1950s when automation drove out the last keeper. Since then, it has stood lonely on the edge of a cliff, surrounded by a dense coniferous forest and the Atlantic Ocean, which beat continuously against the stone walls. A group of friends that included 4 students, Josh, Michael, Sarah, and Kelly, decided to take a little outing to Seguin Lighthouse in late September. The location was perfect for the shoot. The wind was stirring up the waves and the sunset promised bright, contrasting pictures for social media. Josh was an avid amateur photographer, and as the leader of the group, he whipped everyone up for the venture. Sarah and Kelly, 2 friends, walked reluctantly, more worried about getting lost among the pine trees. Michael, Josh's best friend, joked along the way about the spooky romance of lighthouses, but even his jokes couldn't fully dispel the tension that hung over the group as they emerged from the woods and saw the old lighthouse in the fading sunlight. The structure was grim. Peeling walls, a rusty fence, and heavy oak doors that didn't seem to have been opened in years. Despite this, the entrance was not blocked. Someone had previously ripped off the old chain that held the door. "We should take pictures from the top," Josh said, grabbing the camera. And before anyone could object, he disappeared inside, his footsteps muffled, somewhere in the rising darkness. Sarah, who was afraid of heights, stayed downstairs with Kelly, while Michael decided to follow Josh 10 minutes later. He promised the girls he would return quickly. As his figure disappeared behind the heavy door, the silence around them became even more palpable. After 20 minutes, Kelly began to get nervous. No sounds, no voices. It was as if both Josh and Michael had simply vanished into the dark walls of the lighthouse. A fresh breeze from the ocean made waves, but nothing seemed to make its way inside. Eventually, both girls decided to overcome their fear and climb up the trail. It was cool inside, smelling of old wood and salt. The stairs creaked underfoot, but there was no sign of their friends. As they climbed higher and higher, Kelly suddenly noticed that there were traces of dust on the floor, or rather the absence of dust, as if someone had literally just climbed up. They reached the top landing, where windows with a panoramic view of the ocean opened before them. Josh and Michael were not there, however. Instead, Josh's cell phone lay on the floor, its screen on. Sarah picked it up and froze. The last photo had been taken just a few minutes ago. It showed a blurred horizon, dark ocean, reddish sky, and something that looked like a fuzzy silhouette looming over the water. The shape resembled neither a bird nor a cloud, but something larger that seemed irregularly elongated and indistinct. Michael was not found until hours later. He was found by rescue workers a few hundred meters from the lighthouse, amidst a dense pine forest. He was sitting on the ground with his arms around his head, repeating that he did not remember how he had gotten here. He smelled like ocean water and his boots were soaking wet. When asked about Josh, his only answer was, "I was at the top and then nothing." Investigators who arrived on the scene the next morning found several inconsistencies. The lighthouse door appeared to be locked from the inside and the lock was rusty, impossible to open from the outside. On the floor near Josh's phone, they found wet shoe prints that led to the exit but stopped abruptly as if their owner had simply disappeared. Further searches around the lighthouse and in the woods yielded no results. There were no signs of a struggle or the presence of anyone else. The FBI was brought in, but all efforts were in vain. Josh's cell phone was the only clue to the event. Analysis of the photo revealed no camera manipulation or defects. Specialists confirmed that the silhouette on the horizon was a real object, but its nature could not be determined. Seguin Lighthouse was closed to visitors for another decade. Josh's disappearance was officially recognized as an accident, although no body was ever found. Michael was released from the hospital a few days later, but his condition remained uncertain. He never spoke of that day again, and a year after the events, he left Maine for good. The phone with the photo is still in the police archives, and locals have begun to avoid the lighthouse again, repeating old legends that the lights on the horizon are more than just ships in the fog. The Melnikoff family traveled to Lake Ladoga at the end of July 1989, when summer was already drawing to a close, but the sun was still warming quite generously. They stayed on a wild shore, in a picturesque bay surrounded by pine forests and smooth boulders. The father, Oleg, worked as an engineer and rarely allowed himself a vacation. The mother, Irina, hoped for at least a few days of quiet, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. 9-year-old Artem, their son, was a restless and inquisitive boy who immediately began exploring the area. They pitched their tent near the water, a little further away from the main trail. Oleg immediately started fishing. Irina laid out a plaid and books, and Artem was allowed to play near the forest, but on the condition that he would not go far. Tall pine trees began literally a few dozen meters from the shore, and their trunks stood so sparsely that the forest did not seem dangerous. "Not more than a voice's distance," Irina warned. Artem nodded and, grabbing a stick, ran towards the trees, pretending to be a knight or an explorer. Several hours passed. The day was calm and warm, but towards evening, when the sun began to slip toward the horizon, Irina raised her head from the book and noticed that her son disappeared somewhere. Oleg, who had just returned from a fishing trip, tried to call Artem, but only silence answered. They searched for him until dark. Oleg walked several trails shouting for his son, while Irina stayed near the tent in case Artem returned. After several hours of fruitless searching, they called the police. The search unfolded already at night. Rescuers, local residents, and cynologists with dogs came to the place. The forest around the cove was calm, but a sense of tension hung in the air. People searched the area with flashlights, combing the ground meter by meter. The dogs picked up the trail immediately near the spot where Artem had last been seen, but their behavior was troubling. They stretched deep into the forest, in an almost perfect straight line, oblivious to obstacles. Fallen trees, ravines, and dense thickets, which seemed impossible to overcome, did not stop the dogs. By morning, they had traveled several kilometers deep into the forest, but the trail broke off as suddenly as it had begun. No belongings, no sign of struggle, just solid forest and silence. Artem was found the next day in the morning. He was found by a local hunter 10 kilometers from the camp in a clearing among the pine forest. The boy was sitting on the ground with his arms around his knees, staring at one point. There were no injuries on him except scratches on his hands and face. The hunter immediately called rescuers, and the boy was returned to his parents. Irina and Oleg rushed to him, but Artem did not react. His eyes were empty and his face remained emotionless. He remained silent, even when asked how he had gotten so far from the tent. The doctors stated a state of stupor. No injuries, no dehydration, no signs of poisoning or hypothermia. It was impossible to explain, as the boy had spent the night in the forest without water or food, having traveled a great distance. The following days, police and rescuers carefully surveyed the area. According to the data, Artem walked 10 kilometers in a perfect straight line. Even a grown man could not walk like that at night without a flashlight. He crossed several ravines and swamps, where there were no signs of stumbling or stopping. The only footprints that could be found were small baby steps that stretched in a straight line across each of these natural barriers. Foresters marveled. In this area, dense undergrowth and roots make traveling at night nearly impossible. Experienced hunters said that sometimes the forest could throw a man off balance, but that didn't explain the way Artem walked without turning or stopping. A few days later, Artem spoke. His words were rambling, but certain phrases made the investigators wary. He said he followed a voice that called his name. The voice was quiet, but insistent, and he felt he had to go forward. It wasn't Dad or Mom. I couldn't see who it was, but I had to go. The boy described the forest as different, dark and still, with no sounds of birds or wind. It seemed to him that the trees were watching him. Child psychology experts called it the effects of stress, but locals spoke of old legends. The Melnikov family left Ladoga a few days later. They did not talk about the incident again and did not return to this place. Artem took a long time to come to his senses after the experience, but he was never able to explain what had happened to him. Investigators closed the case as a case of disorientation, although none of the explanations satisfied either the parents or those involved in the search. Jotunheimen is a land where the giants of Norse legends seem frozen in stone. Here, among the glaciers and ridges, there is always silence, which is only occasionally broken by gusts of wind or the echo of stones rolling down the slope. The mountains are mesmerizing and frightening at the same time. Every tourist who comes here knows that nature does not forgive mistakes. Thomas and Anita arrived in Jotunheimen in the spring. The season was still unstable. Some of the snow had already melted, but the higher parts of the trails were covered with ice. This was their first visit to Norway, and they had carefully planned the hike in advance. The route through narrow gorges to the snowfields below the Stuggebreen Glacier was considered medium difficulty, but in such places even medium could become dangerous due to unpredictable weather. Thomas was an experienced hiker and had a good sense of the terrain. His gear, from thermal underwear to navigation equipment, had been picked out to the last detail. Anita took her camera and a small backpack with snacks and water. She didn't like extreme sports, but the scenery they saw on the first day fascinated her. Blinding white snow against a blue sky, jagged teeth of peaks and dark silhouettes of rock walls that rose to the clouds. They followed a winding path that looped between the rocks, gradually gaining altitude. As the sun began to sink into the horizon, they reached a gorge that led to a wide snow glade, the final point of the route before the glacier ascent. "I'll go ahead and check the trail," Thomas said, leaving Anita near a large boulder where she sat down to rest. He turned and disappeared between the huge rocks, his footsteps quickly disappearing into the silence. Anita took out her camera and began to take pictures of the surrounding scenery. The sun reflected off the snow, creating the illusion that the entire space around her was enveloped in a soft, almost ethereal light. 15 minutes passed. Thomas had not returned. At first, Anita was not worried. She knew that her fiancé was sometimes fond of exploring the area, but time passed, and Thomas did not return. Feeling anxious, Anita followed his footprints in the snow. They led her through the gorge to a snowy clearing that opened up before her like a white immensity, and it was here that she stopped. Thomas's footprints ran in a straight line across the clearing, but stopped abruptly in the middle. Nothing further, no sign of him. The snow all around was flat, undisturbed by people or animals. Anita stood there trying to figure out what had happened. Thoughts pounded in her head. Perhaps he had gone back the other way or had fallen through the snow. But there was no sign of failure here. She shouted his name, but silence swallowed the sounds. The mountains seemed to absorb any noise, leaving only emptiness. Anita hurried back to the village, where she reported Thomas's disappearance. The rescuers showed up quickly. The locals knew well that in such places every hour of delay decreases the chances of rescue. The next morning, a team with sniffer dogs went to the clearing. They found Thomas's tracks, but just as Anita had said, they ended in the middle of a snowy expanse. The dogs circled around the spot, whining, but they couldn't pick up the trail any further. Experts examined the disappearance site for snow traps or hidden holes, but the surface was tight and undisturbed. No avalanches or snow gullies. The helicopter circled the area, checking nearby slopes and gorges. There was no sign of Thomas. "It's like he just disappeared into thin air," one of the rescuers said, looking around. After a week, the search was called off. Thomas was still missing. The locals couldn't explain Thomas's disappearance, but they all agreed that Jotunheimen was a special place. Legends had been told about these mountains since ancient times. Anita returned to her hometown, but her life stopped in that snowy field. She kept searching for answers. 5 years later, Jotunheimen remained a popular destination for seasoned hikers, but Thomas's name still lived on in the minds of local guides and rescuers. His mysterious disappearance became one of many stories about the mysteries of this rugged region, but no one expected the story to take a new twist. In the summer of 2021, two hikers, a married couple from Germany, were hiking the same route where Thomas once disappeared. It was a sunny day, and the snow in the open meadow had almost melted, exposing the rocky ground. As they walked along the trail, they came across something strange in the middle of the clearing. It was Thomas's stuff: a thermal jacket, gloves, and hiking pants. They looked practically new. No signs of decay, dirt, or damage that should have appeared after 5 years of lying in the wilderness. They seemed to have been dropped off only recently. The couple immediately notified the local rescue service, and the news quickly traveled around Jotunheimen. The rescue team, joined by experienced guides, set out to search again. The area around the clearing was combed to the smallest detail. Dogs, drones, and even GPR were used to detect possible anomalies underground. However, this time too, the search yielded nothing. The dogs again circled around the place where the clothes had been found, without taking the trail any further. Nowhere within a radius of several kilometers was there any sign of human presence. The feeling that Thomas had simply vanished into thin air remained unchanged. The discovery of the clothes sparked new discussions. Some experts speculated that the clothes might have come from animals, but the fact that they showed no signs of wear or damage disproved that theory. For Anita, it was a return to the nightmare she had been trying to put behind her. She traveled to Jotunheimen again, but Thomas's clothes gave her no answers, only new questions. Thomas had never been found. Despite repeated searches, no new trace of him had been found. Clothes found in a clearing 5 years after his disappearance only added to the mystery. Investigators came up with several theories, one of which suggested a possible kidnapping of Thomas. They speculated that he might have been taken the day his footprints broke off in the snowy clearing, and years later, for unknown reasons, planted his clothes back. But this theory had more questions than answers. Why did the clothes look like they had just been put down? Who did it, and why? Other experts leaned towards the version of natural anomalies, which are sometimes observed in the Jotunheimen Mountains. The absence of traces around the clothes and the inability of dogs to pick up the trail only increased speculation about phenomena that could not be explained. Thomas's family never received definitive answers, and his disappearance remained one of many unsolved cases that turned this part of the mountains into a place for legends and eerie lore. Now, the snow glade is rarely visited by anyone who stays long. Travelers pass the area quickly, each trying not to look at the vast white plain where once the footprints of man broke off forever. All of these stories have something in common: the silence that comes after the disappearances and the footprints that break off into nothing. The mind refuses to accept such events, but the facts remain. People have disappeared and there is no explanation. What was it? Human error, unrecognized natural phenomena, or something more that we cannot understand? That's all. Subscribe to the channel, put likes, and write your thoughts in the comments under this video. Until new meetings, visit.